On the internet, you can find hundreds of stories and articles about people who mysteriously disappeared and then, just as suddenly, returned. Someone disappeared for hours, although they felt that only a minute had passed. Others were in places that do not exist on maps. Today, you will hear the stories of people who for a moment found themselves in another world or on the verge of something that we cannot yet explain.
Probably you will consider me abnormal, but here is my story. I work as a courier. On an ordinary day, I was delivering orders. I came out from underground and suddenly felt that something was wrong. The whole street was in a fog. It was thick and viscous like smoke. At first I thought just humidity, but I understand that there are no cars. The passers-by seem to have disappeared. I walked a few steps. The architecture was strange. The building was taller with windows without glass, and the streets were wider but empty. Everything was gray, without color. Only one detail was bright, a sign with incomprehensible symbols that I could not read. I turned a corner and was again on a normal street as if I had woken up. People, cars, sounds, everything returned. I turn around and there is no fog even close. Behind me was a normal street. I am in shock. What was that? I told the story to a friend. He, of course, did not believe it, but now I avoid foggy streets. Fog seems to me a door to another place.
This happened a couple of years ago. I, as usual, on the weekend, went out into the forest for mushrooms. The area is well known. I often go there. The weather was excellent, and the basket was already pleasantly heavier. About 2 hours later, I came out into a clearing. I had passed it many times, took a gulp of water from the bottle, looked around, noticed nothing unusual. I crossed the clearing, it took at most 2 minutes, and again went deeper into the forest, expecting to get to the car in an hour from the other side, having made the usual loop. I walked further, gathering mushrooms. The forest was like a forest. Everything seemed familiar, but after some time I began to notice that the trees were a little different and denser. And just when, according to my calculations, I should have been getting out to the car, the forest still did not end. I took out my phone. Strange, no signal. I walked for another 40 minutes, and only then did the trees begin to thin out. I came out onto a road, and I understand that I don't know it at all. No familiar landmarks. Again, I take out my phone, and the hair on my head stirred. Judging by the GPS, I was almost 50 kilometers from the place where I entered the forest and left the car. 50 kilometers! How is that possible? I crossed the clearing, walked at most an hour and a half. I could not physically cover such a distance. I had to call a taxi, explain the situation to the driver. He looked at me like I was crazy. I still can't understand what happened, as if I stepped across the clearing and ended up in a completely different place. Since then, I have not gone to that forest for mushrooms anymore. It's kind of creepy.
Late in the evening, I was riding the metro from work. I was very tired and dozed off. I woke up from a jolt. I looked around. The car was empty. The doors were open, but there were no people. I walked up to the exit of the car. The station was not the same. There was no name. The walls were gray, like concrete in a bunker. The light was dim and cold. There were no signs, no advertisements, no people. I walked along the platform. Silence. And there was no one, only a faint humming. Suddenly, I heard a voice through the speaker, but these were not words about armitation, as if it was speech, but in a language that does not exist. I returned to the car, but the train did not move. I sat down, closed my eyes, and prayed to wake up. Probably never before have I asked for help so much as now. And suddenly, I heard sounds. When I opened my eyes, I saw a crowd of people. For the first time in my life, I was happy about a crowd of people. And I saw a familiar station. Everything returned. The clock showed that only 2 minutes had passed since the moment of departure. I don't know what it was and where I ended up then. In 2004, 31-year-old Jeremy Childress participated in a hunt near the mountains in Oregon. There were 4 of them. They set up a camp on the slope. Jeremy went into the forest for firewood, saying that he would return in a couple of minutes. Approximately 5 minutes later, the whole vicinity was shrouded in a thick fog. According to the other members of the group, the fog was so dense that no one could even see their feet. Jeremy did not respond. His comrades called him, but in response, silence. According to them, nothing could be heard, neither wind nor bird song. When an hour later the fog dispersed, he was nowhere. Friends tried to find him on their own, but everything was in vain. He just disappeared. A rescue unit was called. The search lasted 3 days. They used dogs, helicopters, thermal imagers. Everything was without result. He seemed to have dissolved. The strangest thing is that a month later, his wife received a package. Inside was Jeremy's pocket knife and a note. "I am still here, but I don't know where I am." It was written in Jeremy's handwriting, but without the sender's address. The wife claimed that she felt his presence, as if he was very close, but in some parallel world, beyond the visible.
I will tell my story. Several years ago, I was driving home at night on a familiar road. The whole road is straight, and there are practically no forks or turns on it. I had driven it dozens of times, but at some point I paid attention. The roadside changed. Instead of old poles, there were some modern blue ones, which I had not seen before. I looked at the navigator, it screamed, and then showed that I am parallel to the road. The navigator showed that I was literally driving parallel to the road about 200 meters from the highway through a field. But in fact, I was moving on the road. I even slowed down to get my bearings and see what kind of road this was and how they built it so fast, as if in a couple of days. But everything around looked a little not so. The forest was different. The asphalt was as if new, but without markings. I drove for another 15 minutes. Everything was still empty. Not a single car coming towards me. Then the road just broke off. Right in front of me was a concrete barrier and a sign with the inscription, "Preserved." I was a little taken aback. There was no desire to get out and look. I turned around and drove back. The navigator started working again, and suddenly I was on my highway only about 10 kilometers from the point where I should have been. Already at home, I searched through all possible maps and was convinced there is no parallel road in that area, and there never was. Until now, I don't understand where exactly I drove that night, because no matter how hard I tried, I could no longer find that road.
In October 2019, 32-year-old Michael Harper went on a small hike to Acadia National Park, State M. He was an experienced tourist, knew the route, and was going to walk only 7 kilometers to the observation deck and return before dark. Around noon, he called his wife and said that everything was going according to plan. As it would later become known, half an hour later, he entered the fog, dense like milk. The last thing he wrote in a message to his wife, "I see only white. I'm scared." She tried to call him, but the phone did not answer. The signal was gone. Rescuers began searching already that same evening. They combed the entire route, called a helicopter. There were no traces, no clothes, no footprints, as if he had evaporated. And then, the next day, exactly 27 hours after the disappearance, he himself came out to the road, barefoot, with disheveled hair and an overgrown beard. The clothes were torn and he was trembling. By appearance, it seemed that he had been in the wilderness not for a day, but for at least 2 weeks. Michael was in shock. He was sure that he had walked through the fog for only a couple of hours. He recalled strange trees, silence, and how the light was not right, too dim, as if underwater. He said that at first he heard someone calling him by name but saw no one. This was the only thing he remembered. Further, a memory lapse. He could not explain what happened to his clothes and where the shoes went. The doctors were amazed. The nails and stubble corresponded to a minimum of 12-14 days in wild conditions, but a little more than a day had passed. They found neither hallucinogens nor brain damage. He was absolutely healthy. Since then, he avoids those places and says that fog is not just a natural phenomenon.
He believes that he entered a gap between worlds, and perhaps he was just lucky to return.
In my student years, my friend and I were renting an apartment in an old house of the 60s. Once, having decided to replace part of the wiring, we needed to find the electrical panel, and the neighbor from above said it should be in the basement. We went down. Old walls, lamps blinking, the air was stuffy. We went a little deeper. We saw a long corridor and decided to look just out of curiosity. About 10 minutes later, we realized that we could no longer find the exit. We walked, turned, but there was no exit anywhere. We even started marking the walls and still ended up in the same place again and again. The phone signal disappeared completely. Panic was growing, and we decided to just stop and sit down to catch our breath and try to calm down. And then about 15 minutes passed, and suddenly behind us a bright lamp lit up by itself. We went to it. The exit turned out to be 2 steps away, right at the stairs, as if it had always been there. Although we were standing in the same place before that. Since then, I do not go down into basements, especially in old houses.
In the summer of 1911, in Italy, a group of tourists sat on an excursion train of 3 cars. It followed a new tourist route near Rome, including passing through an old tunnel. Among the passengers was a married couple. Everything was going calmly until the train entered the tunnel. Almost immediately from nowhere, a thick, viscous fog appeared. It filled the cars, caused suffocation. Panic was growing. 2 passengers, that very couple, could not stand it. Having pulled the emergency brake, ran outside right into the fog. They ended up inside the tunnel, almost at the entrance. The fog was so dense that they could barely see each other. After a few seconds, silence ensued. The train seemed to have disappeared. No light of lanterns, no creaking of wheels. The couple returned to the nearest station to report what had happened. Workers arrived, examined the tunnel. It was absolutely empty. No traces of the train, no damage, no traces of braking. The train disappeared, as if it had never existed. Not a single one of the passengers was ever found. The tunnel was soon closed, and they tried not to spread information about the incident. And those 2 who survived until the end of their lives repeated that the train got into another reality.
This story happened to me 7 years ago. Then, I often went fishing alone to rest from the bustle and breathe out. I especially loved a quiet lake, an hour's drive from the city. No one bothered. Silence. Around, nature. On one of such trips, it was especially hot. The fish almost did not bite. Everything was still. I decided to cool off, stepped away from the gear, but so that they were still in sight, and dived. And surfaced not there anymore. Immediately I understood. Something was wrong. The air was as if icy. Instead of a sunny sky, some purple-gray haze without sun, as if a curtain of thick glass. The lake was darker, thicker. The water seemed viscous. Around, not a soul. The forest seemed to have disappeared. Only a rocky high shore was visible, all in cracks and black dust. I got out trembling. My gear disappeared. The air was heavy. There was no wind. And even stranger, that not a single sound could be heard. Suddenly, somewhere in the distance, a loud hum was heard. I panicked, jumped into the water. I swam and prayed. I in panic swam in circles, feeling how my heart was beating madly. And then, at the bottom, I saw light. As if a reflection of a real sun, something seemed to pull me to it. And then a jolt, and I surfaced back in our world. The sun, stuffiness, fishing rods in place. Only by feeling a couple of minutes passed, and in fact, a couple of hours. I in haste gathered my things and left. Since then, I don't swim in that lake anymore, and don't advise anyone.
This happened a couple of years ago when I was driving through Poland on the S8 highway. It was evening, and I was tired.
And when I saw a gas station with a cafe, I decided to stop to drink coffee and stretch. I parked, went inside, bought a cup, sat for a couple of minutes. When I returned to the street, the car was not there. I looked over the whole small parking lot. There is no car, no traces. I think everything was stolen. I called employees, explained that the car disappeared. We went to look at the cameras, and this is where the strange thing begins. It is visible how I arrive, and behind the car a thick gray fog stretches, like smoke. But I did not see it at all. In the recording, I got out and went inside, and the car was covered by this gray gloom. Further, the fog dispersed, and the car is not there. It just disappeared. And do you know what's even more interesting? The car was later found 8 kilometers from that place on the side of the road, moreover, locked from the inside. And there were no traces of a break-in, nothing like that. I still did not understand what it was. In each of these stories, there are strange details, which remain in the head for a long time. Such things are difficult to prove, but also impossible to forget. Sometimes it seems you just turn not there, but maybe not into that reality at all. If something similar happened to you, write about it. Perhaps you are not alone.